presentation, like Laura's, would be more speaking in academic, if I'm allowed to do that, and I'll actually be reading it out. The reason is this, that I like to use this amazing opportunity given to me, and thanks, Oscar, for that, to sort of challenge some of the frictions, if you will, or the interstices between what we understand as activism and what we understand as research, in the way that anthropologists usually do, which is through what we call a nuanced engagement for a long time in ethnographic fieldwork. Nuanced engagement with a long time with the people we research in, through, on, and about would offer leads us to contradictions. And so I'd like to show, I guess, through this presentation, through 3 ethnographic examples that, by the way, do not include Cyprus, my research, my current research interest. I'd like to show how the very term activism could be contradictory when faced eye to eye in the field. So my paper's titled, I don't know if you can see the PowerPoint, Ethnography with People You Agree With and Really Disagree With, Activist and Non-Activist Entanglements of Political Anthropology. So in this, I'll be presenting, just nod if the PowerPoint slides change or not. Has it changed now? Yeah, cool. So it's just 3 ethnographic examples from past research in 2 Mediterranean sites, which is Western Sicily, the largest island of the Mediterranean, and Italy, and in Thessaloniki, Greece. These were long-term fieldworks, the Sicilian one for 18 months, and the Thessalonikian one for 20 months. And the Greek fieldwork resulted in 2 kind of parallel research interests. One in which I was working with people that I really liked. So the first part of the talk is called Those You Like, and the other with people that I really disliked. And I believe most people in this panel would dislike them too. People that were professional conspiracy theorists. That is, that's my sort of pet project, my kind of side hobby, if you will, academic hobby. And I've published a wee bit on it. So conspiracy theory is really one of my interests. And these people were prone, and especially a couple of them that I'll mention in this talk, were prone to and have been engaged with fascist politics. So, and lastly, I'll talk about people, that is interlocutors, right? Research informants, subjects, they call them in other disciplines, that really don't like you, the researcher, anymore. But I'll get to that when towards the end of the talk. The first part of the talk concerns my fieldwork with solidarity economy activists, people that amidst the Greek crisis were putting up these makeshift, impromptu, informal markets, anti-middleman markets in cities like Thessaloniki, and who eventually, some of them, and we're talking about several dozens of people, some of them managed to create the larger cooperative, food cooperative, consumer cooperative in the Balkans. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about. I became a member of that cooperative, and this is what went down. Cooperatives are understood to provide the conditions of and for horizontalism, operating on the grounds of one member, one vote scheme, a protectionist environment that professes equality at work. So they are industrial democracy, right? They are quite literally activism at work. In the solidarity economy's core boom of the Greek crisis, cooperation, as I mentioned, was springing and was spreading. It was set out on erstwhile paradigms of reciprocity within Greek society, but it was also quite a novel phenomenon, an outcome of the crisis. So co-ops are bound by 2011 law, progressive step ahead, and one of the main reasons for avoiding a full-on downward spiral regarding labor, employment, and development. That law asserts that the administrative council of a cooperative should be the main body of management and administration for a cooperative. Such body is able to take executive decisions in certain circumstances, and it's bound by the charter, the Corps Charter, which is the foundational document for each cooperative. Much debate in conflictual situations in cooperatives that I've studied, like this one, that recently had 8 years in existence, was around this issue, the charter. In the Lycaon Co-op, the one I'll talk to you about, the largest consumer cooperative of the Balkans, based in Thessaloniki, members learned that the charter is only the co-op's face towards the state. In the 19 months I've spent working in Lycaon, I have been told oftentimes that the co-op had two faces. That's what the activist said. One face for the state and the other, which was inscribed in the charter, one for its people, more accurately depicted in its General Assembly. Many cooperatives profess and members struggle against the charter, as seen in events of the so-called solidarity economy. They thus do not recognize its regulations, and in a quasi-socialist style, bestow all powers to the other body, that is, the General Assembly that meets annually. So there's a tension between the General Assembly and the charter. The members' assembly is said to take all decisions and is informally agreed to be able to trump any directive from the administrative council. So the General Assembly is above the administrative council in following activist understanding of solidarity economy. There lies the double life of the new cooperative movement in Greece and elsewhere. The law pertaining to cooperatives is observed only nominally to give way to more equality, and the actual co-op life is informally agreed upon by members. So we are faced here with a double tension, that between law and equality, and that between formal written procedures and informal oral commitments. In times of crisis, the universally agreed oral and informal plan to follow the General Assembly is sidelined by the Administrative Council. So this cooperative, Lycaon, as I said, is the largest cooperative in Greece and the Balkans, and it was the pet of the solidarity economy movement in Greece. Its most successful outcome. It was an idea to follow. Following them was an idea to follow the most efficient case of a co-op that all interlocutors around in the solidarity economy suggested was more than just about a couple of people finding work, and more than a consumer cooperative. It was the genuine outcome of a successful social movement. It has 430 members. All members are allowed and indeed encouraged to participate in the meetings and assemblies of the co-op, and it has a very high, sociologically speaking, member participation, in that of these 430 members, about half or more do show up in events of the cooperative, especially the General Assembly that meets annually or sometimes biannually. So among these members, they are the 120, a numeric category that stands for specifically categorized understanding of participation. These are those closer to the views and practices of the co-op, the real activists, the core activists, right? The 120 out of the 430. While the 430 would receive a notification of the coming General Assembly, it is only those 120 that would be notified in current events, from minute issues such as the mass order of meat to politically intricate things such as labor recruitment and how to go about it. 120 groups in formal name interestingly resonates with the movement of the 136, another social movement, an activist mobilization against the privatization of water in Thessaloniki, in which many of the Lycaon COP members were part of. After these, alongside these groups, there's the group of about 50 people who constitute the core membership of the COP. Pretty much all of these people would show up at the General Assembly every 3 months. Most would come to the weekly assemblies every Wednesday evening, and some around 20 would actually be there every single week. In fact, in the 12 General Assemblies conducted so far, the ones I followed, there have been 250 members that took part with, while in all weekly assemblies combined, at least 70 have participated. There are also members who are paid workers, and many more members who offer volunteer labor. Some of those offering volunteer labor are pensioners, but all of the paid members are people between 30 and 40 years old. Overwhelmingly, the former are working class. The latter are working class, coming from poor areas of the city, while most of the former come from jobs in the public sector or are small entrepreneurs themselves. This form of this differentiation created a distinction that was verbally associated to people's livelihoods, the working members and the volunteering members. It did not reflect tier 2 tiered system in normal times, but in crisis times, it did arise quite heavily as a two-tiered society of sorts. And there was the contradiction and the tension that the ethnographer would face. Me, as a member of the cooperative, in order to study the cooperative, I had to become a member. In order to do participant observation in the cooperative's practice, I had to attend each and all the assemblies and meetings, etc., for almost 2 years. And so I became intricately involved, willing or not, in these tensions, and keeping a clear head was not always easy or indeed possible. The assemblies with the most heated and spirited conversation that in a few occasions would end up in yelling and indeed accusation of Stalinism and other vile threats were those around issues of labor, as the members would put it. Such issues concern the treatment of the working members and turned out to be the most subtle but also the most ambivalent. These were the meetings with the longest duration and the most overwhelming attendance as well, typically starting at 8 p.m. and ending at midnight. What is doing ethnography in these heated environments? Is it picking sides? Is it necessarily picking sides? Is it not being able to do ethnography or fieldwork or any kind of social analysis without picking sides? And what do you do when people are throwing things to each other in the middle of an assembly in which you are the next to speak, and you're invited to speak not as an anthropologist or ethnographer or an academic or a professor, but as a member of the cooperative, and that yet 6 months after would need to write an academic paper about it? Is participating in assemblies the heuristic device we have when studying democracy or when studying industrial democracy? The question comes with a pressing urgency when presented with the delicacies and contradictions of participant observation in activist circles. Anthropology goes awry and looks like an oxymoron when participation is tiered according to membership. As I said, it's almost a two-tiered kind of membership in a core and inside and outside group. And particularly when observation cannot keep danger for interlocutors at bay. The participant observant is called upon to enact on the lives of the research participants when a member of the institution, when he or she, in this case he, is a member of the institution that engulfs them. In such situation, the ethnographer needs to vote on decisions that immediately affect the lives of other members and interlocutors, often with dramatic effects. Indeed, for example, I had to vote for whether I was for or against the firing, the laying off of a COP member who was accused of malpractice. Being a member of the co-op and a participant in these assemblies proved to be a serious ethnographic hindrance and revelation at the same time. Overliking the activism involved implied taking a stance in the zealot discussions and disagreements amidst assemblies. This challenge arose precisely from the ethnographic need to be as entangled as possible. Entangling oneself in membership activism necessarily implied embedding oneself in the heated moments of change and conflict in the co-op. It also implied doing an uncomfortably engaged anthropology with those you like, with fellow activists, possibly because you like them. The anthropology of the mirror image is what I would like to call it. And it's the mirror image, you can think of Lacan, but it's just also a very empirical kind of understanding of who do we study, right? Like Max Weber said famously, or it's attributed to him, that you, as a social scientist, you either study what you are or what you're not. And if by and large we can say that sociologists study, or were meant to study a few decades ago, people that are mostly familiar with to the Western gaze, and anthropologists, those people that are not that familiar with us, the strange, the different, the other, then I think that dichotomy to some extent does hold water still, which is why I'm moving to part two, those you dislike, which is really, in my opinion, the real anthropological challenge and fascination. I mean, if you're not doing research with the other, with people that, if you're not doing research for verstehen, to understand rather than to commit and engage with, then I think you're missing out on the anthropological, cognitive, and epistemological fascination. So my second batch of ethnographic material came from, this is from, actually this picture, I should say, it's from, was created by fans of the main person I'll be talking to you about, and it's the statue of Alexander the Great in the promenade of Thessaloniki in Greece, which is the capital of Greek Macedonia. He was a Greek Macedonian, and what they do, these far right groups, is that what they were doing back in the day is they were celebrating the birthday of Alexander the Great, which is contested whether he, the very term of birthday can be applied to an ancient figure, but nevertheless. So let me start with the idea of truth activism that I'd like to put forward. It's an emic idea. It's an indigenous idea, as we say in anthropology. It's something I've encountered in the field, following, reading about, debating, discussing about, responding to 11 p.m. phone calls from interlocutors. I was very much taken by that idea that we're banging about, which is we're not conspiracy theorists, we're truth activists. And the people I was in debate with, in conversation with, were authors of books that could be dubbed as conspiracy theories. Anything you associate with the term was there. So I'm not going to go list in each and everything my interlocutors wrote about, but it's very familiar stuff. Apart from a few that are a few issues that have a Greek component, so to speak. So, for example, the Epsilon group, which is an ancient creed of saviors of Hellenism, etc. The idea of truth activism refers to bridging the gap that makes reality and truth differ. I first came across the idea after I met Maria, a 32-year-old woman who worked for one of the publishers I worked with, which is one of the most successful publishing houses of conspiracies. She was coming from a left-wing background, and her recently late father was a committed unionist. So, but because of the crisis, she found herself in need of employment, and she embarrassingly accepted a job at this publishing house that had sort of far-right associations. Maria works as a salesperson, managing internet and phone orders and house delivery of the Ethnos books. And through her, I started meeting people in this and other publishing houses that kept on mentioning the issue of truth activism. It's one of those people, the most celebrated one, and the only one I'm deciding from now on to not anonymize in my free work, in my research, which is this guy, the guy to the right here, in the first picture, and who is posing with the leader of his ex-party, and now as a leader of his own party on the right. His name is Kyriakos Velopoulos. So seeking out that difference between truth and reality for these truth activists, I looked out for the owner of the publishing house where he worked, who is precisely this person, Kyriakos Velopoulos, a man with a rich activist biography on the far right, which began with organizing, as I said, the birthday of Alexander the Great alongside a neo-Nazi group that you might have heard of, the Golden Dawn, which is now almost defunct. But that was back in the early 2000s when Golden Dawn were very small and when Kyriakos Velopoulos was a TV persona and not a politician himself. But his political activism continues for the better part of the last 2 decades. And eventually, as I said, he became for 2 years a member of parliament with the party on the left, not on the left, as in the left wing, on the left of the picture, right? And then on the right picture, aptly named, moving there further to the right, and having his own party, he's been a member of the Hellenic Parliament again for the last 2 years, and his party is actually the furthest to the right after the demise of Golden Dawn. So I met him at his office at a radio station. He's a journalist, where he was busy, and after I waited for an hour and a half or so, and he met me for a while. He was very apologetic. He was very nice. He was very kind. He said, "I have to chunk you out as I need to make payments," when he had to terminate the interview, and he did stress several times how he was a good employer, and I did cross that information with several of his employees, and indeed he was an excellent employer. He comes from working class background. He comes from immigrant backgrounds. He was an immigrant. Well, his family, his father and mother were immigrants in Germany. So he always stressed this idea of man of the people and working class man of the working class, so to speak. I commented on the good conditions of his employees. He boasted that it's the same for his radio station staff, where he had 25 people working there. I feed the mouths of many young people. So you're sitting in front of a caricature of his, as well as the original emblem of the Greek Revolution of 1821, and he was in very high spirits. I'm going to quote one bit of that conversation. "There is a difference between reality and truth. When I read and write history, I register reality, not truth. My truth might be different than yours, but reality is reality. The sun is the sun. A table is a table. The truth is that you can say, this table is nice, but I don't like it very much. There exist many different truths, while reality is one. And it's not only factual, but also theoretical. That is, you cannot prove that the earth is rotating. It's just scientific reality." That's end of quote. So the idea of truth is central here for truth activists, or as conspiracy theorists like to call themselves. It figures as the constitutive element in structuring conspiratorial pursuits. It is also differentiated, in the words of conspirators, from reality. In another interview, when I met him a couple of months later, so close to that date, he said, "An author mainly writes from his soul, while a researcher mainly from the mind. I write mainly from the soul, from the heart, but with facts. I am doing the research and expose the facts in order to demonstrate and prove that those things I believe in are indeed how things are. And the other, the reader, has the burden of proof. When I have a sense of the truth, I go out in books to find it until I found it. End of quote. So truth is associated to the condition when one is obsessed with the truth, and the burden of proof is reversed. The dazzling point on finding the truth is unwittingly repeated as on finding the truth, going out to find the truth, is sort of a resonance of a classic quote from, maybe unwittingly, from Mein Kampf, actually, Hitler's book, where the truth-tamed reality is set up on a reversed burden of proof. So the burden of proof, what is the burden of when you write scholarship? You have evidence, you have to provide them. When you write conspiracy theory, the burden of proof is reversed, so that the reader has to prove that what you're saying does not stand, right? And in Mein Kampf, that's a central tenet of the thesis. That is, it is not I who need to explain and prove. The plain fact that power is afraid of what I'm saying and tries to disprove it implies that I am right. Another conspiracy theorist, and indeed an author, and indeed eventually a friend of mine, who is far from a fascist, called this sense of reality the elephant and the poppy. So he says, there is an elephant hiding behind every poppy. Do you see it? I obviously respond, no, I've never seen an elephant hiding behind the poppy. To which he responds, well, do you see now how well he is hiding? However, when I question the tactics of people like Rakopulos or Rakopulos, another far-right conspiracy theorist, my friends claimed, well, I mean, I also disagree with them, but they're just selling books, not guns. This soothing statement needs to be taken seriously as it shows the analytical limitations in fully identifying conspiracism, seen as truth activism, with a dangerous far right. While Nazis had an ambivalent relationship with truth, truth is the enemy of the state, as Goebbels said famously, the veil of reality in classical conspiracism lies in front of the truth. So reality is a facade and truth is behind it. And what conspiracism, far-right conspiracism need to do is penetrate the veil of fake reality and reveal to us the truth. So look behind what you see, the truth is behind, as Rakopulos told me repeatedly. So the evidence of this research itself does not point to the direction of the far-right stereotypes, always. Rather, some authors, including Rakopulos, have often underlined to me how anti-Semitism or anti-Masonry are futile pursuits. As one of them said, another conspiracy theorist, Arinakis, there is a cognitive gap between here and there, the place where we are and the place we are going to. The journey itself, the trip of knowing, of getting to know, is widening the gap. Before Amundsen went to the pole, the North Pole did exist, but not in the mind of the many. Researching is trying to fill the gap, which is always widening. So, some research advice from conspiracy theorists and truth activists. Evading the disciplinary construction of human knowledge according to social science, one that conspiracy theorists reject, becomes a research priority if one is doing research on conspiracy theory. As ethnographers, we're not here to challenge the truth of these activists, in my opinion, but to understand the very cognitive construction of the reality. We can also inquire that access, as well as how this process is constituted as common sense, sometimes with frivolous, other times with violent results. After all, so it is seeking and finding otherness, then it is comprehending that other with patience and even care, even maybe not love, but definitely care for understanding the radical other, if you will, in this case. After all, fascists like Rakopulos have something in common with the lefties we usually like in the field or in research. Rather than a cancerous, poisonous, or rotten idea of anti-enlightened paranoid thought, some of their intellectual pursuits towards truth activism at all costs seem embedded in the radical criticism of modernist thinking. The De omnibus dubitandum in Latin, to doubt everything, to contest everything, is a mantra that inspired Marx, it inspired Weber, and it is central to critical thinking and not just a side effect of it. So now, moving from after those we like and those we dislike, let's move on to those who don't like you anymore. So in this case, in my case, in the case of my Sicilian ethnography that led to a book that I briefly talked to you about and other stuff, it had to do with anti-mafia activists. So people who work on land, like this guy here, a friend of mine, that the state confiscated from the mafia, the Italian state that is, confiscated land plots in the area of Western Sicily where I was based, and redistributed them to land cooperatives. So again, cooperatives, my main research interest, and indeed to these anti-mafia activist cooperatives. I spent, as I said, a year and a half with them back in the day in 2008-9, where they were beginning their journey, and they were more radical and more activist and more cooperativist than when I started re-engaging with them 10 years later, very recently, in 2018 or so. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. The moment where the ethnographer or the researcher realizes that I started doing this because I have had a soft spot, possibly, for this kind of activism, anti-mafia activism in this case. But 10 years later down the line, as these institutions, these activists or erstwhile activist institutions have changed, maybe the current leaders don't like me anymore. So maybe it's difficult to do research with them anymore. So when I mentioned to my anti-mafia cooperative informants in Sicily that I was planning to publish a book, an academic book based on our interlocutions and common experiences, I was stunned by the result of the negotiations over a specific detail, the cover of the book. That's in 2017, right? So almost 10 years after my actual fieldwork with them. Of course, this apparently very important detail was not discussed with informants as such, but rather with one representative of the corps I had studied more closely. A new, unknown to me email address hit my inbox in reply to a query over precisely the book when I approached Sicilian interlocutors after a few years of only interpersonal or phone call communication. So obviously, as an anthropologist, I have to respect what my interlocutors' worldviews are, right? So the final research published has to include their own imagery of the world, their own socio-political aesthetics. So the question was, I want you guys to pick the cover for my academic book. The problem is that the guys, the activists, had not, been the same anymore, and the structure of the cooperative has changed. And so I originally thought, or I understood that the book's cover and indeed the book's images inside would include faces of a cooperative. So the people I met, like this one, whose ice cream shop was burnt by the Cosa Nostra and whose wife was assaulted by Cosa Nostra in Corleone, or this guy who had to immigrate to Switzerland in order to avoid Cosa Nostra retaliations in the early 90s, or these younger people who also joined. I mean, you see the logo of the cooperative, the anti-mafia activist thing. But instead, there was a difference in kind of vibe when I talked with them again. And the difference in vibe was, I'm not going to read that bit because I've been talking for quite a while now and I have to wrap up. But Francesco, who was the co-op's new PR person of sorts, in this kind of new email correspondence, insisted that I, instead of using faces of people like these ones, that I choose for my book something like this. So he sent me pictures like this that represented what he called a faceless cooperative. So a move away from activism into corporation, in order to quote him, to represent our new reality in a more precise way. That new reality implied that instead of a heroic anti-mafia activism, what the cooperatives cared now, the cooperatives now instituted an LTD, a limited company that represented them. And this guy, Francesco, that I had not met, was the PR representative of that limited company. So what they wanted and needed was no faces, no mention of activism, but just good product placement, so to speak, or a reference to the products that we produce, at least, in order for the new corporate kind of success to be reflected in some of the scholarly outcomes, which was a huge challenge for me, but at least I receded in terms of the cover. So that was another pic he sent me. So this is the cover. And eventually the cover of the book did reflect a faceless, post-activist, if you will, cooperative. This is a picture approved by the general secretary, by the cooperative, by the party, so to speak. And so it styles my first book. I mean, I'm not dissatisfied with it, but I think it does reflect a very problematic, if you will, but certainly nuanced process of tackling ethnographic subtleties to do with activism or non-activism in the field. Thanks very much, and sorry for taking away a bit long in this talk.